You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you can climb into his skin and walk around it. Harper Lee is one of the best known. Is best known for her writing of To Kill a Mockingbird in 1959 and To Go Set a Watchman in 2015. She was born April 28, 1926 in Monroeville, Alabama. She was the youngest of four, where she grew up as a tomboy in a small town. Her dad was a lawyer and a member of the Alabama state legislature, and she owned part of a local newspaper. For most of her life, her mom battled a mental illness and rarely left the house. It is because now she had bipolar disorder. Hello, welcome back to Dark Academia Queen. Today we are going to be talking about none other than the famous Harper Lee. Um, if you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications, and subscribe. Um, if you love Dark Academia, you come to the right place. And Harper Lee falls into this category. Um, but yeah. But I love Harper Lee. To Kill a Mockingbird was one of my favorite novels, and the movie was really good too. But yeah. But in high school, she developed an interest in English literature, and upon graduating in 1944, she would attend Huntington College in Montgomery. And there she stood apart from all the other students because she couldn't have care less about fashion, makeup, and dating. She instead focused on on her studies and writing and was a member of the Literary Honor Society and Glee Club. And she would transfer to UA and was known for being a loner as an individualist. And she did make a greater attempt at a social life and thereby joining a sorority for a while. Pursuing her interest in writing, she contributed to the school's newspaper and humor magazine, the Rammer Jammer, eventually becoming the publication's editor. In her junior year, she would be accepted into the university's law school, which allowed the students to work on law degrees while still undergraduates. And the demands of her law studies forced her to leave her post at the Rammer Jam editor. After the first year in the program, Lee began expressing to her family that writing was her true calling. And she went on to the University of Oxford in England that summer as an exchange student, returning to her law studies that fall. She dropped out after the first semester and she would soon move north to follow her dreams and become a writer. So, in 1949, she was 23 when she arrived in New York City. She struggled for several years working as a ticket agent at Eastern Airlines and for the British Overseas Air Corps. While in the city, she would befriend Broadway composer and lyricist Michael Martin Brown and his wife Joy. In 1956, the Browns gave Lee an impressive Christmas present to support her for a year so that she could write full time. She would quit her job and devote herself to her craft. Angels right there. The Browns also helped her find an agent, Maurice Crane. He, in turn, was able to get a publisher, J.B. Lippincott Company, interested in her. Working with her editor, Hohoff, um, Lee worked on a manuscript set in a small Alabama town, which would eventually become the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, let's talk about her friendship with Truman Capote. Um, Sorry, y'all. Had to get something to drink for a second. But one of Lee's closest childhood friends was another writer to be, um, Truman Capote, then known as Truman Persons. Tougher than many of the boys, Lee often stepped up to serve as Truman's childhood protector. And Truman, who shared a few interests with boys his age, was picked on for being sensitive for the fancy clothes he wore. While the two friends were very different, they both had difficult home lives. Truman was living with his mom's relatives in a largely, in town at largely, let's try that again. He was living in town with his mom's relatives in town after largely being abandoned by his own parents. While he was in New York City in the 1950s, Lee was reunited with her old friend, who was by then one of the literary rising stars of the time. In 1956, she joined forces with him to assist him with an article he was writing called The New Yorker. And Capote was writing about the impact and the murder of four members of the Clutter family on the small Kansas farming community. I think I've heard about that actually. So anyway, the two traveled to Kansas to interview townspeople, friends, families, and deceased, and the investigators would work to solve the crime. So they were true crime junkies before they was true crime junkies, y'all. What's not to love about Harper Lee? But she's serving as a research assistant. Lee helped with the interviews, eventually winning over some of the locals with an easygoing, unpretentious manner. Truman, with his flamboyant personality and style, had a hard time initially getting himself into the subject's good graces. Um, and during their time in Kansas, the Clutter's suspected killers, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith, were caught in Las Vegas and brought back for questioning. Lee and Capote got a chance to interview the suspects not long after their arraignment in January 1960. Soon after, Lee and Capote returned to New York, where she worked on the galleries for her forthcoming first novel, in which he started working on an article, which would evolve into a nonfiction masterpiece in cold blood. The pair returned to Kansas for the murder trial, and Lee gave him Capote all her notes on the crime and the victims and the killers in the local communities and much more. Lee also worked with Capote on and off in Cold Blood, and she also had been invited by Smith and Hickok to witness their execution in 1965, but she declined. So, when Capote's book was finally published in 1966, a rift would develop between the two collaborators for a time. He dedicated his book to Lee, his longtime lover, Jack Dunphy, but failed to acknowledge her contributions to her work, for the work. And when Lee was very angry and hurt by his betrayal, she remained friends with him for the rest of his life. That takes a lot of strength right there. Imagine that, like, yeah. But she went on to publish two books in her lifetime: To Kill a Mockingbird in 1960 and The Ghost of That Watchman in 2015. She also worked on and off with her friend on his famed book In Cold Blood. Let's talk about To Kill a Mockingbird now. So in July 1960, Kill a Mockingbird was published and picked up by Book of the Month Club and the Literary Guild. A condensed version of the story appeared to Reader's Digest in a magazine. The following year, the novel won the Pulitzer Prize and several other literary awards. A classic of American literature, To Kill a Mockingbird has been translated into more than 40 languages, and more than 1 million copies sold each year. And the work's central character was a young girl nicknamed Scout, who was not unlikely in her youth. It was one of the major plot lines that was Scout and her brother Jim and their friend Dill explored the fascination with a mysterious and somewhat infamous neighborhood character named Boo Radley. And the work was more of a coming of age, and another part of the novel reflected racial prejudice in the South. Their father, Atticus Finch, tries to help a black man who has been charged with raping a white woman to get a fair trial to prevent him from being lynched by angry white men in a small town. Um, Now let's talk about Ghost Set Watchmen. She published a second novel in July 2015, and the story was essentially a first draft to Kill a Mockingbird, which followed the lives of the novel's characters. Yosef Watchman was submitted to publishers in 1957. When the book wasn't accepted, Lee's editor asked her to revise the story and make the character Scout a child. The author wrote the story for 2 years, and eventually it became To Kill a Mockingbird. So, her Gusset a Watchman was thought to be lost until it was discovered by her lawyer, Tanya Carter, in a deposit safe box. In February 2015, it was announced that HarperCollins would publish the manuscript on July 14, 2015. And To Go Set Watchman features Mockingbird Scout as a 26-year-old woman on her way back to Macomb, Alabama, from New York City. And Scout's father, Atticus, the upstanding moral conscience of To Kill a Mockingbird, is portrayed as a racist with bigoted views and ties with the KKK. Now, in Watchmen, Atticus was telling Scouts, "Do you want Negroes by carload in our schools, in churches, and theaters, or do you want them in our world?" Now, the controversial novel and shocking portrayal of a beloved character sparked debates among fans, and offered literary scholars and students um, fodder for analyzing the author's creative process. Let's, Her second novel also broke pre-sale records for HarperCollins. When reports of 88-year-old Lee's failing health questions arose in whether the publication was the author's decision. Lee's issued a statement through court saying, "I'm alive and kicking and happy as hell," with the reactions to Watchmen. Even the message didn't put an end to the questions. In 2011, um, Lee's sister Alice had written to written that Lee would sign anything put before her by anyone with whom she has confidence. However, others who had met with Lee stated that she was behind the decision to publish, and Alabama officials investigating found no evidence that she was a victim of coercion. Now, you might recall the To Kill a Mockingbird movie, and this is when playwright Horton Foote wrote a screenplay based on the book and used the same title of 1962 To Kill a Mockingbird, a movie adaptation, and she visited the set during filming, and did a lot of interviews supporting the project. The movie version of To Kill a Mockingbird earned 8 Academy Award nominations and won 3 awards, including Best Actor for Gregory Peck's portrayal of Finch. The character is said to have been based on her actual father, so incorporating life into reading, as many authors do. Um, where are some of the later years? Well, in the mid 1960s, she was reportedly working on another novel, but it never published. In 1966, she had an operation on her hand to repair damage done by a bad burn, and she also accepted a post on the National Council of the Arts at the request of President Lyndon B. Johnson. And during the 70s and 80s, she retreated from public life. She spent some of her time on a nonfiction project about an Alabama serial killer, which had the working with title of The Reverend. This work was never published, and Lee was generally lived a quiet, private life, splitting her time between New York and her hometown in Monroeville. In Monroeville, she lived with her older sister Alice Lee, a lawyer who the author also called Atticus in a Skirt. And Lee's sister was a close confidant, as she often took care of the author's legal and financial affairs. Now, she was active in her church and community, and she became famous for avoiding the spotlight as a celebrity. She would often use her wealth that she had accumulated from the success to make anonymous philanthropic donations in various charitable causes. In November 2007, President Bush presented Lee with the Presidential Medal of Freedom and for her outstanding contribution to America's literary tradition. Um, at a ceremony at the White House, her sister Alice once said about Lee that books are the things she cares about. With the assistance of a magnifying device necessary due to a macular degeneration, Lee was able to keep reading despite her ailment. Now, there, of course, were some lawsuits in the publishing deal. In May 2013, she filed a lawsuit with the federal court against literary agent Samuel Pincus, and Lee charged in 2007 that Pincus engaged in a scheme to dupe her out for, of the copyright To Kill a Mockingbird and later diverting royalties from her work. In September 2013, a settlement was reached in court. And later that year, Lee's legal team filed a suit against Monroe County Heritage Museum, located in Monroeville, for trying to capitalize on her fame of To Kill a Mockingbird and for selling unauthorized merchandise related to the novel. Lawyers for the authors and the museum later filed a joint motion to end the suit, and the case was dismissed by a federal judge in February 2014. That same year, her famous work to be released was an ebook that she signed the deal with HarperCollins. Um, and to release To Kill a Mockingbird as an ebook, and in the release show by a publisher, she attained, "I'm still old-fashioned. I still love dusty old books in libraries. Don't we all, honey? I don't like ebooks. I'm sorry, I don't." But yeah. But Lee would die February 19, 2016, at the age of 89. Her nephew, Hank Connor, said the author died in her sleep. In 2007, she suffered a stroke and struggled with various ongoing health issues. And this would include hearing loss, limited vision, problems with short-term memory, and after the stroke, she moved to an assisted living facility in Monroeville. Around the time of Lee's death in 2016, it was announced that the producer Scott Rudin had hired Aaron Sorkin to write a stage version of Kill a Mockingbird. In March 2018, several months after the production's scheduled Broadway debut, her estate filed a lawsuit on the grounds of Sorkin's adaptation was significantly deviated from the book's original material. A main point of contention was that it reportedly showed him in early scenes with an oppressive racial feeling of the time, as opposed to the heroic crusader he was in the novel. Now, Rudin pushed against the assertion, and that characters were significantly altered through the insisted leeway to adapt to contemporary times. Alright, that is it for this episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.